Hi, welcome to the Indie Wine Podcast. My name is Matt Wood, and this is episode 39. I recently spoke with Evan Lewandowski of Ruth Lewandowski Wines. Evan started the winery over 10 years ago, and since then has been making some amazing natural wines. We run through many of his current releases today, getting fun backstories and history of the vineyards and the blends, while also hearing how he got his start, some of his influences, potential Utah vineyards, and the things he really loves in a wine. Here we go.
We've got like a bazillion SKUs, or at least Sarah would say we have too many. It's never enough for me though.
That's why you started a new company, so you can have.
Yes, exactly. We just started a new wine brand, which you get to manage. Sorry, Sarah. Yeah, so I think sort of separating them all out on brown labels versus non-brown labels is kind of how we've rolled in the last decade or so. The brown labels being the more single vineyard, old vine, historically significant, or just very, very special. Either like single vineyard or single ranch. With Boaz, that being one of our first wines we ever made. Just like showing people what that thing from that place is. And then the more whimsical or fun or flashy labels is like Faints, Tato, Rosé. Those are like the joyful side of things. Fun, playful, bright, poppy, punchy, party wine. I mean, you can pick them apart if you want to pick them apart, but they're just very drinkable, very fresh, inviting, and super easy to drink, and potentially not like over cerebral. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because tasting these two next to each other, they're both of our a couple of our skin macerations. You can see that this is punch. This is juice. This is sunny delight, and then this is like something altogether different. That it's really hard to sort of put your finger on. You don't know if you like it. If you, most people, it's a polarizing wine for sure.
Okay.
But it's two sides of that coin. So I guess that kind of shows what the difference is with these, with the brown ones, and I think it's starting the conversation more and more of what's classic, what hangs around, what's trendy, what's trending, what's a flash of the pan. And I don't want to be a flash in the pan. You know what I mean? I want to do this forever. And so trying to figure out how to relate to people in that classic way, and especially with these, the newer generation of wine drinkers coming in, and I think just us in general, we like the channel to change a lot. We like explosions. We like flashy, fun, new. You've never seen this before. You have to try it. We're drawn to that as people, I think.
Yeah.
But looking back after doing this for 12 years now, I like both sides. I like that new all the time feeling, but then there is that concept of classic, of familiarity. Like, I know this wine, I've had this wine, I've had all the vintages of it or whatever, or I can't wait for that next vintage to come out. It's that thing that is like more of a constant. That's another thing. It's definitely one of the things I love about wine in general, recognizing something I've had before, saying, oh, I don't think I've had that vintage, and being excited to take that off the shelf, even though it's sitting next to an entire shelf of, eye candy labels I've never seen before. I would like to create wines that do the other thing as well, that make you feel like home, that you know what you're going to get, even though it's a new vintage, and you liked it before you pick it up, rather than picking up some new flashy thing.
Yeah. What does making classic wines mean to you?
I mean, I think it's, I think consistency. There's always going to be vintage variation, of course.
Sure.
But consistency, and when you work with a vineyard, over and over again for a while, you start to learn its idiosyncrasies, how things go in the vineyard, both in the vineyard and in the winery, and knowing that, oh, this fermentation is going to act this way. This is what I need to do, to sort of either corral or cushion it into the right space,
Okay.
without having to correct or intervene. We see that really frequently with Naomi, or this is our 11th vintage. I know that wine is going to stick at like 2 bricks almost every single year. Now, is that a nutrient thing? It doesn't come in with like great nutrients from the vineyard, but it's not super poor. We've got worse nitrogen levels. But for whatever reason, when you direct press this particular Grenache Gris from this particular vineyard, it'll go up into about, like I said, 2.5 bricks, and then it starts to slow down, wants to stall. So then it's like, okay, you have to be ready for that. Stick it out in the sun. Make sure you're stirring it. Make sure you're keeping it warm so it doesn't do that thing that it doesn't stop fully. But if you're constantly changing every year, you're constantly changing vineyards or changing style. It's hard to know how to act, and you're just reacting in a lot of ways, and sometimes that can lead to great inconsistencies in quality.
Yeah, you don't have like that historical precedent kind
exactly.
of for the wine.
I think historical knowledge is especially for wine, and for what we're talking about with classics. You can't rely on something if there's no consistency. From year to year, if you're like, I don't know what this wine is anymore. It doesn't taste like it did last year. It's not even from the same vineyard this year. So I think I'm trying to, I don't know, as the older I get, I'm trying to balance those two things. I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah.
Remotely. Again, coming to know a vineyard like this, it's wildly difficult to sample. The vines are, anywhere from 100 to 112, 115 years old. And there are all sorts of different clones of Grenache Gris, Grenache Noir, Garnacha Peluda. It's mostly Grenache Gris where we pick from, that one particular corner. But in terms of ripeness, this wine is all over the place from vintage to vintage. We pick pretty much on pH, on acid levels, and it's been anywhere from 11.8 to 14.5. And I love both. I love both expressions of the vineyard. And I don't know which one I would rather do per se, but I don't know if that's, I think that's probably an ego thing, trying to say this is what I like and this is what I want to do. Instead of, I think this is a healthy fermentation number parameter with pH versus sugar, and that's when we're going to pick.
Is that from McDowell?
This is McDowell.
Okay.
Yeah. So we've been getting this, like I said, since 2013. And super lucky to even step foot in it. It's a very, very historic, very special place.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've been up there, but
I haven't, but I've heard about it and read about it,
Chris Brockway,
and had other wines from it.
Yep, totally.
And mostly Grenache, right?
Yep. The McDowell Valley at large is I think the largest block on that side of the highway is the Grenache. That's 8 acres. But then, some of the oldest Syrah in the country is planted there. I think the oldest Petite Syrah in California is there.
Okay.
And old Grenache on both sides of the highway, but the historic, the more ancient blocks are on the north side of the highway where this is.
How did you first get into the vineyard?
Sam Bilbro. So his older brother Scott, with Marietta, their family winery owns basically most of the fruit and most of the vineyards in McDowell Valley.
Okay.
So when Sam and I first started working together back in 2014, he had started making Grenache Gris from this vineyard as well. This is before he had fully separated out into Piedmontese varieties. And so he had Grenache Gris, he had a little bit of Carignan, but this particular thing that I got to be a part of, like going and sampling with Sam from time to time or seeing it come in, and then he put it through carbonic maceration and then kind of a light maceration after that. So it was pink, but it was poppy, juicy, super intense, really concentrated, captivating minerality. I had to try to get my hands on it. And the next vintage, 2013, was the first year. And then for whatever reason, Scott, his older brother, was like, there's like 16 different small producers working with us. It's really, really hard to manage. It's really, really hard to deal with it. And so I wasn't offered the fruit that next year, 2014. And hemming and hawing, crying about it. I was bummed because I loved it. So I was like, hey, Sam, why don't you just get like another 2 tons? See if Scott will let you buy another 2 tons, and we'll just like hush it. So he was, all right, you're crazy, let's do it. So made it again for 2014, and then famously was having a grilled cheese at the former Bergamot Alley wine bar here we had in town, sitting next to Scott. After a couple glasses of wine, I admitted to what we did, and he was actually kind of miffed.
Oh, really?
He was like, "Why would you do that?" I was like, "Well, I was told I couldn't have it." And I had to get creative. And he was like, "Dude, you are family. Don't you ever do something like that again." I'm like, "Okay, cool." So 2015, still on for 2015? Cool, thanks, bye.
Yeah. Okay.
You got to fight sometimes. You got to scratch. You got to scratch your way in.
Yeah. So the rest is history on that one.
And so now, I mean, I still take that one little section right out, kind of behind there's a giant, multi-100,000 case production facility up there that has nothing to do with the vineyards, has nothing to do with Marietta. I don't even know who it's owned, Bronco, I believe. So it's just basically rows and rows and rows of gigantic tanks all outside, crazy giant barrel haul. And they're just chewing through fruit every day. I don't even know what their production is, but it's insane. But then to see this vineyard next to that, like, oh damn, this is the future. Oh man.
Yeah.
So it's a crazy juxtaposition to see it.
Yeah, I could eat that vineyard in a day probably.
Oh yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah.
How are you treating it once you get the Grenache Gris?
Yep. So this is fully direct press, so no skin contact. We throw it in the bladder press, and it's a fairly phenolic variety. The Grenache family tree kind of has this very interesting texture across the range of clones, and this is no different. I love texture on Grenache Gris. It's got this sort of it's got weight, but weight and acid. But I sort of try to ride the line on, not picking up too much color in the press because it is still sort of like this Hello Kitty color, and then also trying to eke as much of that texture out. So one of the press cycles that we have on the bladder press is kind of a rough one.
Okay.
Ramps up pressure pretty quickly. It spins. It spins more than it normally would in a little more delicate, like say, Cremant or Chardonnay press cycle or whatever. It's because you're not trying to pull out bitterness or texture when you want delicate finesse. That's not what I want with this. I want that sort of mouth-watering, sort of crystalline feel on the side of your palate. It's almost saline.
Yeah.
And then to have that weight. So we just try to express that a little bit more heavily there. And then so just that this juice goes to tank. We ferment that. That's typically in either a smaller stainless tank or a few polyethylene shaped eggs. And then it gets barrel down, old barrel, polyethylene egg or old barrel or both. And then we bottle it a year after that. So it's bottled in the fall. No, that's a big fat lie. It's bottled in the spring. We bottle in the spring to sort of kind of try to capture a little bit of freshness before those high tones kind of dissipate. And then we release it in the fall.
Okay. So just get a little 6 months of bottle age or something on it before you.
Totally.
I'm gonna hop back a little bit with you, but how'd you get into wine?
Yeah.
What made wine grab you?
So kind of, supplementing income in the college days. One of the jobs was as a busser at a French restaurant. This little French restaurant in Salt Lake City across from Sugar House Park called L'Avenue. Woefully ahead of their time, I think, for Salt Lake City. It was an incredible spot. Chef was great. I didn't know much about the wine list at the time, but looking back on it, I think for Salt Lake City, it was pretty decent. But, just running around and handing checks to servers after the table's been cleared or whatever, I was always confused as to why that couple spent $200 on a bottle of wine.
Okay.
Because I'd had wine before and it was gross. Yeah. My mom had a box of Franzia in the fridge, in the garage fridge. I can distinctly remember pulling a few glasses off of that, 8 years old, wondering what it was, not really liking it, obviously. But then, you fast forward to college and people are drinking out of the red cups and, or it's in their Camelback at the football game. None of it was good. None of it was interesting. I was always, again, perplexed why anybody would pay money on it, especially that kind of money. But once I graduated as server, then was required to go to wine trainings that they had every month. So there's a white training and a red training every month. The very first white training is, I think, when life changed for me.
Okay.
And it's crazy. And I told the story over and over again. It still makes me laugh because it was like, looking back, it's like the wines were still kind of garbage. Like they didn't pull out the crazy stuff for the training. Mm-hmm. Some decent stuff actually. Schramsberg Blanc de Blanc, that must have been Schramsberg 96 or something. That was the sparkling that we tasted. That was mind-boggling. Robert Mondavi Fumé Blanc, probably like 2001 or 2002, frosted bottle, Sauvignon Blanc, but barrel fermented, barrel aged. And Sonoma Cutrer Les Pierre Chardonnay, that must have been like a 99. But just blown away that wine could smell like that, taste like that, have very intricate but also recognizable fruit flavors that you only associated with that fruit. How did it show up in this?
Yeah.
And then the Somm, she was just, I think it felt like she was speaking directly to me the whole time.
Okay.
Just relating it to, I was studying geological engineering at the time, because that's what I was into. And she, talking about parent material and striations in the soil and clay versus sandstone versus granite versus limestone. And I'm just like, what? That's also important in this? Cool. And then just, talking about geography and society and history and coming together as living in communities. Like that's when these sorts of things start to really show up and take off and become really important. It's not just a beverage. It's so much more than that. And so I was like, Jesus, okay, great. Now I have to change my major. Now I know now I have to do this. So I actually finished my major at the University of Utah and then went back to school for grape growing after that. But I think that was definitely the epiphany moment. It also helped that we we finished the bottles off and got a little lit and had a really good afternoon in the sun on the patio. That was also nice and, intriguing. So yeah, literally I from then on, it was reading a whole bunch as much as I could get my hands on books that made sense. Mm-hmm. I made a point every Wednesday night to take my tips from that previous weekend and try a different bottle of wine from the wine store. My friends thought I was crazy. Yeah, they're like, "What are you doing?" They're playing foosball, and I'm drinking wine, reading a book.
Yeah. Was there a book that grabbed you?
Yeah, I'd say a couple books for sure. I think the very first one that just kind of really splayed it out into understandable terms was The Wine Bible by Karen McNeil.
Okay.
Thick book, but not overly cerebral, not overly intense in on the production side, the science side. But it was, it gave you a really good overview of what things were, where they came from, appellations, yada yada yada. Certain little highlights on producers. But it was when I picked up Adventures Along the Wine Route by Kermit Lynch. Yeah. That's when it made it human. That's when it made it like there are people out there doing this thing. They're farming. They're taking care of their land. They're making altogether unique, singular things, and that's important. And that seems really cool. I think I might want to do that.
Yeah.
It was that. I probably read that book once a year now.
It's one of those books that kind of sticks with you.
It's crazy.
It's like just little anecdotes. You find yourself thinking back to them.
And you kind of pick up on new things every year, or you're like, one of the producers, had recently passed away the last time I read the book, and I was like, damn, that's a loss, Mm-hmm. And just think like 20, 35, that'd be like 50 years ago now.
Yeah. It's like 70, probably
76 or something like that.
Yeah.
I don't remember the exact date, but that's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And to be on the front end of it, of what is almost the norm in small winery distribution or importation now, like he wrote the book on it.
Yeah, literally.
And how old would he have been? 25?
Ooh, I would say, I would think like mid-20s.
How cool. I want to do that.
50 years later, he's still alive 50 years later. Mm-hmm. So he couldn't have been like that old.
Right, yeah, true. Yeah, exactly.
It was towards the beginning, obviously, of his experience. So did the thought that you might want to start making wine, is that kind of when it started to like trickle in kind of, or are you still like sommelier?
I was still, so I still definitely went towards the retail restaurant side of things for a while, but I had kind of been farming with a buddy back in North Dakota. His parents owned a farm sort of on the Minnesota-North Dakota line.
Okay.
And we'd go back there for a few summers and just, work our faces off and make as much money as we could to bring back to school. So I think kind of understanding, looking around with Nate's family, seeing that you can farm and support a family by growing things from the ground, and kind of drinking wine and reading these books and, hearing about, vigneron or whatever, the light bulb goes off one day like, oh, wait, you farm this stuff. Like, you like farming, you like wine, you could do that.
Yeah.
And so that's when I was like, I might want to go into production somehow. So my first internship was in 2006. That was in Dry Creek, just not far from here, actually, Ferrari Carano.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And I was stoked because at that point I was really into Oaky Chardonnay. The bigger, the better. The more ripe, the more bombastic. The more I was into it. And so when I got placed by a company that places interns from all over the world, they help you find spots. I got placed at Ferrari Carano and I was pumped.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I think it changed pretty quickly the first week I worked there though, because it was like, smell and pressure check those 400 barrels now. Like, okay. Oh, I don't ever want to smell a barrel ever again in my life. Shit. Yeah. But somehow after that, I still wanted to pursue growing or making. So then that internship was 2006. And then I went to school the winter of 2007 was my first semester up in Walla Walla.
Okay.
The city's so nice, they named it twice. So yeah, studied viticulture at a technical school. They piggyback off of the community college there, but they've got their own winery, they've got their own vineyards. It's really pretty focused, which I think is pretty unique among schools. Opted not to do the winemaking side of things. Okay. I think after having been in school for 4 years at the University of Utah, and then I'd been in Walla Walla for a year. Just knowing how academia teaches you how to do something, it's pretty prescriptive. It's pretty recipe oriented, and I kind of had the feeling that it was going to be a lot like that. Like these are the numbers you pick it at. These are the yeasts that you can add. These are your extractives and enzymes and filtration modules and all that kind of stuff. And I was way more, especially by then, I was way more interested in the organic and biodynamic side of farming. And so I was like, well, fuck that. That's not what I want to do for winemaking. I would much rather go learn it from people that have been doing it for generations. So I just kind of struck out and did apprenticeship after apprenticeship after apprenticeship.
Yeah, you got a little world traveling.
Exactly. Yeah. Kind of hopped around from hemisphere to hemisphere and just tried to get as much experience as I could with wineries that were sort of the same ilk. Biodynamic farming, they weren't necessarily like natty 0.0 producers, but they were working with fruit that was biodynamically farmed and then making wines very responsibly off of that fruit. So my first 0.0 harvest was actually my last apprenticeship. Okay. Yeah. Okay. But it was cool to see that, you can do that. Yeah. Like the no buckets, no whisks, no.
Are there any like processes or just moments from any of those that you find yourself kind of like thinking back to, or that you think had a large influence like in your style?
Yeah, I mean, I think so many. I mean, I'm just trying to come up with one that's more so than any other. I think probably the last couple for me were the most formative, just because they were the most hands off. There's a winery in Alto Adige called Tenuta Loacker. They call it their Schwarhoff estate. It's just outside of Bolzano, up in the hills by Santa Justina. And I kind of picked them. They were recommended by a former boss. Picked them for variety and for altitude and for their practices. Kerner, Schiava, Lagrein, like really interested in those at the time for whatever reason. And then, yeah, really fell in love with the spot, but we didn't do much. And so it was just kind of a testament. And I think also the last two producers that were, the next one was Christian Binner and Alsace. But both of these producers, like, it was funny. It was funny because I feel like working in California and working in Australia and working in New Zealand, everyone's really sort of trying to mitigate ripeness. Like, okay, we've got to figure out, and then adding acid and adding water and do all this stuff. Like going over there and working with them in their system, these two producers pick ripe fruit and are excited when fruit gets above like 13% potential alcohol. And we're all just like, no, no, no. But in places that can do it and do it balanced, kind of learning that ripe fruit is your friend. So we're not, I think that informs a lot of my winemaking now. We're not afraid of sugar. We're not afraid of ripeness. I mean, like I said, that one can run the gamut between, Naomi can run the gamut between 11.8 and 14.5. The Riesling is almost always well above 13. But then we've got like, this is 10.8, this is 11.1. So it's not really about the sugar at all. It's about the ripeness of the fruit, the ripeness of the acidity.
Yeah.
We're not, this is 15, that's 13.9, that's not so bad. But I say bad in quotation.
Yeah, yeah.
But, you know, Riesling is very, very easily favorite. If I was gonna choose a favorite variety or like choose to drink one thing for the rest of my life, it would definitely be Riesling.
Okay. What is it that kind of hits you?
Oh, what isn't it that hits me? It all hits. It all hits. I mean, I love aromatics. I love perfume. I love scent. I love anything that can sort of elicit a strong emotion that can sort of dig up memories. And scent is obviously that, but I think the more aromatic a wine can be, the better. You'll catch the drift.
Yeah.
And Riesling for sure is the variety that does it the most for me. It's just got this haunting, tough to pin down, whether it's sort of musky jasmine flower or flamed, nutmeg on a lime at a tiki bar. And then it's just, it can be weighty. It can be anything. It can be, screaming acidity, sect, or it can be, Trockenbeer and Auslese on the other end of the spectrum. And everywhere in between can throw out some incredibly complex wines. And I like them all. There's nothing I don't like. I love the Clare Valley, the Eden Valley. I love those. Those are typically bracing, really lean, picked really early, petrol-y as hell. And then over in Alsace, it's like broad-shouldered sandstone, usually off of sandstone, and like kind of, bosomy, giving, like it's got curves. And again, like that haunting aroma profile is always very captivating to me. So, and always with acidity, always bracing, always crunchy, always salivating. Yeah, there's nothing Riesling can't do. And then, but everybody talks about Pinot, how it expresses itself so readily and so openly on the different soils that it comes from. Chardonnay, similarly. I don't think anything beats Riesling for me. Like I can pick out sandstone versus granite versus schist almost with my nose closed. That doesn't make any sense, I realize, but it's so readily apparent. I guess if you probably have to drink it a lot, but I think it's incredibly expressive, and it's an incredibly I don't want to say naked variety, but it's hard to not be able to tell where it's from. And I think that's really neat too. I think that screams cool. So this is a vineyard called Cole Ranch. It's the country's smallest appellation. It's 189 acres, which is teeny tiny. To be a full AVA, to be a full appellation designated by the government to be different and distinct and unique. It's planted in the early 70s by a gentleman named John Cole. He fought tooth and nail to get the appellation pushed through. And he was successful, I think 71 or 72. I don't know. I forget the exact year. Then it went through a time sort of mid 90s, early 2000s with another family. And so none of the fruit was really available. No one was buying it. It was
Okay.
all being kind of gobbled up by that one particular family winery called Ep39. Unfortunately, the bank foreclosed on them in 2016. It was a big, long, a horrible ordeal for them, I'm sure. But what the product of that was, the bank had obviously taken the property and had hired a vineyard management company to take care of the property, make sure it doesn't go south, make sure that the fruit comes out good, that it can then be sold or at least look good to a potential buyer. But a friend, Cody Rasmussen, he's the assistant winemaker for Bedrock,
Right. Yeah.
and owner of Desire Lines. That's he and his wife's brand. He was just happened to be driving by on the 253, probably going from Ukiah to Anderson Valley, checking on a vineyard. If you blink, you miss the property. But being a Riesling dork and and working for equally dorky wine people, you kind of crane your neck and make sure you slow down a little bit just to see what's going on, because it is so historical and so cool. But he noticed, it must have been October 8th or 9th, that the fruit hadn't been picked in the front block, and which is the oldest Riesling block. And so he stops the car, gets out, looks around, puts a business card, like writes on the back of a business card, like, notice that this isn't picked. Here's my number. So the vineyard management company calls him back, and they're like, oh gosh, yeah, we've got like 30 tons. Bring your bins.
Wow.
He was like, oh, I was thinking amount maybe two tons.
Yeah.
And so that's when Cody just got on the phone and called everybody that might be interested in. The consortium of Riesling dorks showed up a couple days later with their bins, and we all picked on the same day. And it was kind of party time. It was fun, and that was our first vintage with that, and we haven't stopped. I fell in love with it. It's an incredible site. It's on limestone, which is rare. It's super rare for Riesling, but it's also very rare for Mendocino at large. Like, there's not a lot of limestone in Mendocino. So this front section of this particular property is all limestone. Again, these were the original plantings, so early 70s. It's dry farmed. It's organic. Good friends Mike and Jill, Lucia Shattuck.
Yeah.
They own the property now, so they purchased the property from a different gentleman a few years back, and so now that two very good friends own it, it feels right. It feels good, because there was a time where it was like kind of dicey. We didn't know what the future would be for this vineyard, and so I called the vineyard manager, vineyard management company one day, and I was like, hey, who knows what's going to happen if somebody buys this vineyard? This is not the most profitable block. It's planted on 8 foot by 8 foot spacing. So there's not a lot of plants per acre, and it's Riesling. You can only charge so much for it.
Sure.
So would it be more profitable to put Chardonnay and put it on a more normal, more modern spacing? For sure. But nobody, you don't want that to happen. So I went in and I took like a few thousand cuttings off of the property and then grafted them onto a property up in Yorkville Highlands that Sam owns, Sam Bilbro.
Oh, okay.
Just to try to preserve that genetic material, that story just a little bit. But a few years later, lo and behold, Mike and Jill come in and buy it, and everything's cool. Now I get to make Riesling from both.
Yeah. Have those cuttings taken well?
Incredibly, actually, yeah, really, really well. Better than I've seen elsewhere. That's for sure. Very few misses. And it performs super well too. It's vigorous. It puts out a really healthy, like 4 ton to the acre crop. But tasting them side by side, this limestone one versus the one that's planted on schistous sandstone, this one is so much more mineral, so much more chalk. It's older vines, older root systems for sure. But the grapes are way smaller, way more intense. Clusters are way tiny. On the sandstone one, it's much more giving. It's much more vigorous. That one's more delicate. This one is intense, like vermouth on the nose, and then the sandstone one is more just fresh lime, drier sheets. It's just like crisp linen, and then more broad on the palate. It's really interesting. But again, same clone, same genetic material, just very different soils.
So 2012, you started the winery?
Winery was 2012, yeah. We made 100 cases of 3 wines in a tiny little warehouse in South Salt Lake. the nexus of the winemaking universe.
Yes.
As we all know.
To some people, it might strike as like a crazy idea to pick your grapes in California,
Sure.
drive them to Utah.
They're not wrong. It was crazy.
What were your thoughts like going into that? Was it like a temporary thing, or just like money, perhaps, or home, or?
Yeah, definitely home. Definitely a place that I wanted to be. It's a place I still want to be. But I think it was like a grandiose, or maybe naive, I would say, idea that it wouldn't take that long to get a winery up and running, and then to also simultaneously plant ground that's never been planted before in a state that is not known for grape production. I guess I just didn't really understand the dynamics of owning a business, a wine business in particular, and then how much money it takes to do anything. And so thankfully we did see a bunch of success. And, we were able to slowly ramp up production from 300 cases the first year to 500, 750 to 900 to 1100. Then we found ourselves at 2,000 cases in 2016, 2017. Yeah, 2017. And it started to become like, I still don't think I have my feet under me. I still don't think even with the expansion that we've done, even with the cases that we're putting out, I still don't think I can afford I can't afford to do the thing, but I would also need somebody to manage it, or like the business is such that now I need, there's so much time that's required here. I don't know that I'm going to be able to do the thing down there in South Central Utah that I've been dreaming of doing without something up here suffering or something in California suffering. So it was just, it wasn't that difficult to make the connection or to make the decision, hey, okay, maybe it's just going to take getting everything back to California, being closer to the vineyards, actually living where a wine industry exists and there is support. Then you can develop a team. Then you can make the necessary moves to start looking at hiring somebody to manage something somewhere while you're not there, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where we're at now. We moved back in 2019. 2018 was our last vintage to take things back to California, or back to Utah. And so 19, 20, 21, 22, those years are a blur. But we've slowly been making those moves. We've got Sarah as a director of operations now, so she takes care of a lot of the administration. She takes care of a lot of the like distribution management, allocations, website stuff, newsletter stuff, just managing inventory even. And then Mike D, whom we share as an assistant winemaker with Idlewild, he's boots on the ground in the winery. I'll give the emails up. I'm not good at them anyway. I'll give the paperwork up any day. I won't give up the winery. I won't give up actually getting out there in the field and getting out there in the winery. Full-time winemaker we don't necessarily need, because we're there and I'm there and hands-on.
Yeah.
As much as I possibly can be. But yeah, it's like we're kind of in the process of making those moves to try to get us to a place where we can actually do the planting and make it right and do it right, and not have these things suffer, or not have the vineyard suffer for somebody not being there or looking after it. So the dream's still alive, and I think back in 2012 the idea was to again drum up interest. So you plant 5 acres of Riesling in South Central Utah. 3 or 4 years later, you make wine out of it. A year after that, you release it. You've sunk all that money into it, and then who wants 1,000 cases of Utah Riesling? At that point, no one really, to be honest.
Yeah.
Or like you just wouldn't be on any radar. And so I think my idea was to start the winery, make a few hundred cases of things, start to get the word out.
Yeah.
And it's been a decade of getting the word out, and still we don't have any sticks in the ground. So I'm frothing to do it, surely. But it's not getting any easier. Labor's not gotten any easier. Climate hasn't gotten any easier. Water coming out of the sky is not in greater quantity than it was before. You wouldn't know it walking outside today.
Yeah.
But yeah, so there's still all these question marks, and is that the right thing to do, and is it worth the time, effort, money? I don't know. Can you answer those questions? Probably not.
Still a dream, though.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It can be hard to shake those
Oh, for
things.
sure. Yeah,
like-
exactly. And I think, and again, I don't know. It's funny talking to people who are coming up in the wine world, or even with anything. Like, you have a dream. Is it a failure to not achieve the dream because you're pursuing it the whole time in some way, shape, or form, and it's taking you somewhere, and you're still doing things, you're still moving and shaking, you're still learning,
Yeah.
you're still changing, potentially changing the game somehow. So I don't know. There is that thought that crosses my mind sometimes, that I might have to come to grips with the fact that it might not happen. And is that okay?
Yeah. I mean, sometimes the journey can be
Exactly.
enough.
And if you don't have the
story of
dream, you don't
journey.
go on the journey.
Yeah.
So the dream gets you moving. It gets you going. It puts you on a trajectory. And whether that trajectory goes back to where the dream is, or if you go off on a tangent and you end up in another stratosphere of whatever, you still did something, and it's still worth it. So I'm processing right now.
Yeah. I don't think it makes it less valid if it doesn't come true all the way.
Totally.
I mean, still can do great things,
Yeah.
and it probably drives you. Also,
And so onto something that's one of the, one of the crazier ones, one of the more vibrant, joyful ones. Not that you can't find joy in all of these, but this is, you're somehow drinking orange wine and wanting a second glass of it, or sinking the entire bottle, or able to drink a glass of orange wine by the pool. Sometimes orange or skin contact wines can be, clunky. Just so much of savory, or sometimes, tinny or cheesy, or just like way cerebral.
yeah.
That I don't know if they're pleasant.
I mean, a lot of them, I think, really need some food
Totally.
to stand up to them. But this has a kind of that juiciness to it that could kind of drink it more casual if you choose to.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's actually a good word that I haven't employed with these kinds of wines. These are less formal, more casual. So Tato, this is actually the first one I ever thought to make because of something like there was a lack of in the market, or there was a hole in the market that I wanted. I think it was for that reason. Especially domestic orange wine can be expensive. The barrier to entry can be high, or the cost of entry can be pretty high. And then it can also be kind of a crapshoot on what it's going to be quality wise or fun wise. We already made a very cerebral orange wine called Killian, which is a super long maceration of Cortese. But basically trying to strike out and do show people the opposite side of the orange wine coin. It can be bright, juicy, really vibrant, really punchy. And so, yeah, we made Tato based on that simple fact. Like, I want this wine to exist, so I'm going to try to figure out how to do it. And so we basically just take all of the aromatic varieties off of basically every ranch that we work with.
Okay.
Skin ferment them separately. And then everything gets blended in the spring, and then bottled in the fall. So this is 2022 vintage. It's mostly Tokai Friulano from Fox Hill, which is a vineyard we work really heavily with. Basically, most of the stuff on the table is from there, or a good portion. You just spoke with Chris Brockway. Chris Brockway just came to be the new owner of it, which is we're very excited about. So yeah, mostly Friulano, probably 40 to 50% Friulano, and then in decreasing order, 2 different clones of Sauvignon Blanc from 2 different vineyards. Riesling from both Cole Ranch and Lost Hills, and then Kerner from Lost Hills, Gruner Veltliner from a vineyard that you just spoke with Thomas DiBiase about, called La Simas Vineyard in Russian River, Malvasia from that same vineyard, Moscato Bianco back from Lost Hills, and a bit of Trebbiano Toscano from Fox Hill.
Okay.
So 8 different varieties, all fermented
Yeah.
separately on their skins. It's a huge pain in the butt
It sounds like it.
to harvest and then to keep track of, and then to try to make the best wine you can out of all of those lots.
Do these tend to be shorter fermentations
Yep.
on the skins, or are you letting them any of them like kind of go longer and come back around?
No,
or?
we just to keep things kind of light and bright, we try to employ a maceration just for fermentation, and
Okay.
I would say the average fermentation for us is like 10 days.
Okay.
If they're on skins, I would say almost every single time a macerated white grape will take less time to ferment to dryness. So if we direct press this, it would I would say 2 weeks is probably our average, while 10 days is typically the average, I think, for a skin macerated white. And it depends on when it comes in. Like the Riesling comes in, mid to late October. It's 38 degrees in the morning. It never wants to start to ferment. It takes forever to get up and running, and then it's pretty sluggish. Meanwhile, the first ferment that comes in, the Friulano, is like done.
Yeah.
6 days.
Yeah, you've got some cold
I was like,
fruit that doesn't want to warm up.
Yeah, exactly. Totally. So that lot is pressed off, done with mallow, in barrel or tank, resting in the back of the cellar in the dark by the time we get to the last vineyards.
Okay.
So it's nice to have a spreadsheet to try to figure out, like, oh yeah, that's still coming in. We still need to make that.
Yeah. You let everything kind of rest and then blend it in the spring and release it probably in the fall.
Exactly.
Or-
Yep.
okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Most years, I don't know that. I don't know how interested the listeners are in sulfur. It seems like something we're hopefully moving away from harping on so damn much.
Yeah. I'd like to ask you about it though, because I think you make a lot of wines without it.
Yep.
And it seems like you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but it seems like you really treat each of the lots kind of, or the wines individually, whether they need sulfur or not, or is it a consistent thing from year to year that
This one gets sulfur.
this one
doesn't
gets
get
sulfur,
Right. Sure.
or is it like, this one, the pH is a little higher this year. Maybe it could use, how are you deciding whether or not a wine needs sulfur?
Yeah, I mean that's a great question. And I think that speaks kind of volumes what a producer might answer. I think our goal for every single lot, for every single wine, for every single thing that comes in the winery is nothing, 0, everything. That doesn't always work out, unfortunately. There are the outliers, the weird instances of high pH or like a terrifying amount of botrytis.
Sure.
And while not ideal, I wod rather produce something that is consistent, clean, and delicious than let my own dogma about an element that exists on this earth already and is effective in very, very small amounts, rather than let my dogma about that get in the way of making something delicious. I think that's a slippery slope. And I think those are unnecessary unnecessary like little arguments that we get into.
Yeah.
When there are larger questions. I think there are larger issues at hand, and I think it's really easy to talk about sulfur or talk about sulfur filtration. I think they're somewhat more understandable. They're more comfortable to talk about than say like social issues. How are your vineyard workers being treated? How much are they getting paid? Do they have dental? Do they have benefits? Do they have upward mobility? Are they able to become a manager? Are they able to become? Can they get their commercial driver's license and then take that to another company or whatever? Like, that's a much better question to me.
Yeah.
Right now.
Which after we talk about sulfur, let's talk about that.
Yeah. And again, this is absolutely, like I said, the goal is always 0. But there's instances where things start to go through mallow before primary fermentation is finished.
Right.
And the nerdy but short explanation is that if a wine finishes malolactic fermentation, which is bacteria eating malic acid, creating lactic acid, if they consume all of the malic acid and they don't see that as a food source anymore, they have a pathway that they can then start to consume sugar or glucose. So if they, or mostly glucose. So if they start to eat sugar, most of the yeast are like, okay, we're out. Like their bacteria is creating toxins. It's already a rough environment to be in anyway as a microorganism. It's got high acid. There's alcohol now. They've got all this going against them. And now there's this gigantic population of a very, very robust strain of bacteria that's outcompeting them. Your primary fermentation will typically quit. And then the malolactic bacteria will eat the sugar, and their byproduct when they eat sugar is acetic acid or vinegar or VA. So you run the risk of creating this gigantic VA salad dressing bomb. And I'm not into that. So I would rather take a little bit of sulfur, like 10 ppm, 15 ppm, something like that. It's minuscule. Bacteria being a very, very small single cellular organism versus yeast. Yeast are bigger. Bacteria are very sensitive to sulfur. It only takes a little bit to sort of stem them. Some of them will actually die. And then the yeast can survive up to 30, 40 ppm in solution. They can pick back up and have a chance to actually finish primary and do the right thing.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I would rather add a small amount to prevent that from happening if you see it happening. And it happens from time to time. It happened in Feints 22, and so many things go into Feints and Tato that it's like Tato probably has 13 different fermentations that you have to keep track of and make sure don't get messed up.
So one of them started or
yeah. So that's what happened, and that's what happened with the 22. This one's still no sulfur. The Tato 22, but Feints, there was one or two lots in there that just it happened, and so I was like, okay, well, I got to knock that back. And we don't scream it on the label, but if it doesn't say 0 on the label, then a little bit of sulfur went in something somewhere along the lines.
Yeah, and most of that's getting kind of bound up by the time the fermentation ends, and
this would come back like if you were to send that off to the lab, that would come back as 0 total, 0 free. But I know I put it in, and so I do want to be transparent about anything that I do or don't do.
Yeah,
that's
for
funny.
sure.
It's funny.
I mean, I think it's probably a big part of it. I think a lot of people are just more curious. They want to know, so they want to know if something's done to it. Yeah. So,
and I truly believe
being transparent like that.
Yeah,
I think that is all that's maybe required, or as far as you can kind of go with it.
Yeah, I mean, you disclose too much on the back label, people just start to roll their eyes back in their head. They're like, I actually don't care that much. Like that's very technical, and it doesn't mean that much to me. But yeah, but I truly believe, looking back, especially across Feints, this is the one Feints and Boas, we've never added sulfur to. Feints every now and again sees a bit of sulfur, and so going back. We've made that since 2013, going back in the last, over a decade of wines in the library. Every now and again, we'll open them all next to each other and just see what they've done.
Okay.
And it is wild. The difference in vintages, but also difference in what a wine that has varying amounts of sulfur in it tastes like versus wines that have nothing in them. The wines that have nothing in them, I feel, are more. This is going to sound woo-woo. They're more alive. They're more. They have a frequency that the others don't. They're the ones that have been sulfured, or they feel a little clipped. They feel it's almost like something stopped, and it stopped evolving somehow. They just don't feel quite as lengthy in their finish. I don't know. And maybe that's just well, I know I did it, and so I know what I'm about to taste, and I just have this preconceived notion that that's the sulfured one's going to be, maybe not quite as up to my quality standards. But it is kind of uncanny how different they can be, even with 10 or 20 ppm.
But you're tasting it going back 6 years, 8 years,
Totally.
what have you. Just that little, like a little extra gear
Yeah, no, that's
or
it.
like,
Exactly. Or like just, like one of, you have a diamond that's been cut into a cube instead of a diamond that's been cut and shaped to has cut or shaped itself into having many facets to reflect light in many different directions. I feel that's an interesting way to put sulfur for me, at least how I feel the wines taste. That said, multiple vintages that didn't have sulfur are a little fizzy. There's been a little bit more fermentation that's gone on. Someone's done something in there. One or two of them are pretty bready now, Britannomyces. But that makes me smile for some reason. Like, I'm like, oh, you're still alive. Like, and it's not gross. And the corks haven't blasted out. Everything's fine. And they are technically alive still. And so, I think, and then maybe that's just my own tolerance of VA and Britannomyces too coming through.
I don't remember what vintage it was, but I think at that Fox Hill tasting, you poured something that was 2000. You
13.
had some 13.
13,
okay,
13, 13
okay, I
this,
was going to say 13,
Nice
and then I was
segue.
like, that seems on the. I wasn't sure if that was correct, but and that was still like it was alive, but it was clean and like showing age, but
Totally.
but no, it wasn't like a bunch of
Microbial nightmare.
VA jumping out or anything. It was still a clean, like well aged, nice wine.
Thank you. Yeah, I was stoked. I was stoked with it as well. I felt like it showed well, and Chris was showing a 13 Nero d'Avola as well, which I thought was really, really good.
That was another one that was natural wine.
Can do
aging well.
Naturally, you can do it. You can do it. But yeah, so Killian is 100% Cortese from Fox Hill. But this is our long maceration. This is the extended maceration of like 6.5 months. We typically press this mid-March on the equinox. And that's more just, that just feels good to me for some reason. I had the advice that I was given from a Slovenian buddy when I was like banging my head against the wall, trying to figure out what the right thing to do was with long maceration. Because there's your fermentation, your maceration for fermentation, and then you have the option to keep it on skins if you want to eke more character out, to flesh out tannins. But what, as a producer that's young and hasn't really worked with long maceration like that, like how do you do it? How do you not completely screw it up?
Right.
Are we gassing tanks? Are we topping things up on a monthly basis? What are we supposed to be doing? And my first vintage with this was 2012, and I chickened out at like 7 weeks because it started to get a little bit bitter, and I started to sort of like get a little nervous about tannin pickup and bitterness pickup or whatever. And this guy I talked to over the winter was like, well, see, that's what all you New World producers are fucking up. I'm like, you just have to forget about it.
Just let it go.
He's like, it's either short or it's long. Those are the only two. And this was his like, distillation. This was his simplification of the process for sure. But he was like, what we found is like, it's either for ferment and that's it, or it's in the spring.
Okay.
Or longer. And so I was like, okay, that's pretty scary.
Yeah.
But I like the extreme. I like living on the edge a little bit. And so 2013 was that first vintage that we did.
Okay.
That we pressed on the equinox in the spring. And it's exactly what he said. He said that his granddad would refer to it as an animal going into hibernation. It comes out in the spring, and from what I know about hibernation, this is not quite what's reality, but he's like, it emerges in the spring. It's a fresh new animal ready to take on the spring, ready to raise the new babies and blah blah blah. When really they're like angry, hungry, frantic to find food. Their kids are starving them because they're drinking everything out of their teats, and there's like they just need to go find grass somewhere, and they're just So I think the romantic side is cuter.
Yeah, the story is better, but it's not really a linear process though of the tannin extraction.
Exactly. Peaks and valleys, highs and lows, plateaus and dropouts. But in the end, the wine is incredibly complex. It's incredibly savory while being apricot orange marmalade at the same time.
Yeah, it has that kind of has like a saltiness to it though. Also,
Yeah, that's also Fox Hill. Fox Hill can be a very like quartzite, crystalline driven site. This is a wine that we've rarely sulfured as well. But, what vintage was that? 16 or 14? Can't remember. But just, a level of botrytis coming in on the fruit that I wasn't comfortable with. And without really having the capability to sort back then. That's the first and only, it was the only thing I've ever sulfured at crush, like at the distillery.
okay, yeah,
But I've seen things in other places go sideways pretty easily when you don't sulfur and all that sort of not noble stuff comes in.
sure. How do you feel about botrytis in your Riesling?
Um,
Or do you have you had
Coal Ranch?
years where
Oh,
you
yeah.
where you see more of it?
There's always a certain amount of botrytis in this particular vineyard. It gets picked so late, and the site is such that it is moist up in the hills. It's kind of in this protected bowl, but then it also gets warm, and so it's moist for a time, or it rains before it starts to rain in the valley or whatever, and then the sun comes back out. It's not getting enough wind movement or whatever, and the spores kind of blow up or whatever. But then usually the weather goes back to this sort of very late warm ripening weather in early October. That botrytis dries out, and actually you're able to save the vineyard from going too acetic.
Okay.
Because the risk that you run is that those berries that are breaking down kind of break open with all that moisture, and then that's when acetobacter from fruit flies or birds that are coming in and eating the sugar, that's when you start to get real issues with your with the health of your grapes that are coming in. So 20, what is this, 22? This is a pretty normal amount of botrytis, I would say, for this one, probably like 15%. But 2018 was scary. 23 was scary too. This was a really scary one too. It was probably like 25%.
Okay.
Botrytized.
That's kind of like a little bit cooler, those cooler years where it's just
Longer.
dragging out
Dragging
further
on.
into October.
Yeah. 18, I'm trying to think. So the way that we sort of try to remedy that, rather than sulfuring this one, and it wasn't really so much of a bacteria thing, like unhealthy botrytis. It was just the amount of botrytis.
Okay.
Because that particular organism kind of produces an enzyme that is incredibly inhibitory to primary fermentation. It's called lacase. And so the way I've seen it done in other places around the world is that first you put it in the press, and the first like bits and bobs that drip out, or the first like 30 to 60 gallons are kind of washing spores down. And so we basically just sequester a barrel of juice at the beginning, thinking that a lot of those spores, or a good healthy chunk of those spores, have dropped into the pan. We pump it into a different tank or a different barrel, and then take the rest of the stuff that that I believe might be cleaner.
Okay. And then it's just seeing how that barrel sort of shapes up, and, and sometimes it's good, and sometimes not.
It is. Sometimes it takes years. I still have 50 gallons of 2016.
Okay.
Or no, sorry, 2018. The first real scary one, and it took 2 years to ferment. It's like 18% alcohol. It's insane. It's super weird. I don't know what I'm going to do with it. I have a bunch of 375s that I'm thinking about bottling it into, but I don't know. I don't know if the world's ready for it. It smells like, it's like koji. It's like sake.
Oh,
it's so weird.
Wow.
It's so weird.
Yeah.
But it's cool.
Yeah, you don't see too many 18% Rieslings out in the.
And I was just assuming it would stop. I was just assuming the fermentation would quit.
Yeah, it went all the way dry though.
All the way dry. Yeah, which is why it's 18%.
Yeah. I feel like this wine's what a lot of people associate.
Oh yeah.
With your winery.
It's funny. Sometimes you get on the internet, you get on social media or whatever, and it's almost always this. the photos, and I'm like, damn it, we make other wine. Like, we make so many other wines. But it's just something that, is kind of the flashy one on the shelf. And I mean, obviously the artwork is great, and I think for a lot of people like our age and younger than us, this. I've gotten it so many times that this was someone's first natural wine ever.
Okay.
Or this was someone's like first foray into chillable red or something along those lines. Something bright and acidic and fresh for red wine. And so it's formative for other people, which is incredibly, I'm incredibly proud of that and astounded by that.
Yeah, it's got to be a pretty cool feeling
because I have that wine for me, right? I have those epiphany wines, like first natural wine I had, and you kind of idolize those wines and those people, and to think that I made something that someone feels that way about is pretty cool.
Yeah.
And I get a lot of mileage out of that. That's super special. But yeah, definitely the thing that sort of put us on the map back in 2013. Really, the impetus was it was kind of a solution to an agricultural issue.
Okay.
We make 100% Arnase, which is called Malin. And that was one of the first wines we started with in 2012. And we were, gunning to make it again in 2013. But we saw some of the worst deer damage ever to have happened ever anywhere in any vineyard that I've ever seen. And so there was a very, very scant amount of Arnase to go around that year. And so basically wanted to support the grower and wanted to be a team player. So took whatever I could and decided to co-ferment it with Barbera and Dolcetto around the other side of the hill, because that was sort of on the cusp of being ripe for rosé or light red or whatever. So I was like, screw it, let's see. We'll do full carbonic, because why not? We're already doing something weird. Maybe I'll make sparkling, maybe I'll make pet nat out of it, as long as we're going down this track. But kind of fell in love with it along the way as it's becoming a dry wine with a dry still wine, and thinking, oh, well, this could actually be, a Schiavo-like or Beaujolais-like, or those bright acid-driven reds from the old world that are just almost unheard of in California. We were coming off of the bigger is better craze, and something like this just didn't really exist. I'm not saying it didn't exist. I don't want to say that, but there wasn't a lot of it running around.
Yeah. I'm sorry, what year was the first? 13. Okay.
Yeah. And I didn't know if it was going to take, or if people were going to like it, or if it would be well received. And so we decided to make like a one-off label. Had a very good friend in Salt Lake City do the label. And then it just blew up.
Yeah.
Like definitely is the sort of calling card for the winery now. Kind of at the point where we can't make enough of it, or there's not enough fruit off of Fox Hill to do it. To make more of it. So it's a good position to be in, that's for sure. But it kind of carries the name wherever it goes, and then hopefully points back to all these other wines, like, oh, I like that. I go, maybe that's good.
Yeah.
So yeah, not mad about it, but it is funny. It is the one that pops up most frequently.
Yeah, I mean the label is eye-catching on the shelf, and got it in the Flint glass, and it's like the color really kind of pops on the shelf, and
yeah, exactly. And then you get it in the glass, and it's it's exactly what you would expect it to be with that label in that color. And so definitely not surprising anyone there. But it's cool because it's so many different things now. It's Dolcetto, Barbera, Nebbiolo, Grignolino, Brachetto, a little bit of Montepulciano, Vermentino, the Favorita biotype that Sam had crafted there a few years back, and then Arnase. So it's 5 reds, 2 whites.
Okay.
All picked on the same day, all fermented together, full carbonic. So it's herbal, it's earthy, it's rustic, it's pretty. With all of those things, you can sort of, it becomes a thing that's not so unidimensional anymore. I think, a single carbonic light red version of something or other can only be that one thing. But with Nebbiolo picked at like 18 bricks when the other stuff is ripe, that gives you a different feeling. That gravelly sort of tannin, that's got to be the neb. The meatiness that it has that at that point, Dolcetto, I would say, is providing that. The acidity is the Barbera, and the Arnaise for sure. Florality is the Brachetto, Granulino. It's altogether, again, keep saying joyful or joyous, but you can sit down with it and nerd out if you want, or it's eminently gluggable.
Yeah, I mean, it has that tannin that kind of comes in at the finish that
Yeah.
keeps it from being like simple, or it lets you kind of pair it with, I think, probably a wider variety of
Totally.
foods
Super versatile.
and stuff like that if you choose to. But it's a light tannin, and yeah, it was very drinkable. What was the first natural wine that kind of got you
It
interested?
was in the he was living in Park Slope at the time. The Park Slope apartment kitchen of Zev Rovine.
Okay.
Zev Rovine selection. So he and I go way back. He goes as far back as anybody in my wine world, really. I worked for him and as a 21-year-old. I had just turned 21, and he had just opened a wine bar in just outside of Park City.
Okay.
And this was me, trying to figure out wine, trying to get a wine job. And I heard this new thing was opening up, and this cool guy was doing something interesting for once in Salt Lake or in Utah. And so I went up, interviewed with him. He hired me. I opened the shop the next day.
Nice.
And so getting to know him has been obviously pivotal in my wine journey. But fast forward from the cafe to must have been 2009. I was on a sales trip for the winery that I was assistant winemaker for over in Dry Creek, a spot called Quivira. They sent me to New York to do sales. It was my first sales trip ever been.
Okay.
Just trying to figure out how that all works. But Zeb was like, "Oh, come over. We'll crack some bottles. I want to show you what I'm doing now." And he had just, I don't think he had even started. He had maybe just started the company because he had just moved back. So we think he had just started ZRS. But he cracked open a Munchabel Bianco number. I think he was still numbering them at the time.
Okay.
Frank Cornelissen.
Yeah.
So it was his white macerated blend. And I did not know that was possible. Like whatever was in this decanter, this like neon color, things are floating in the decanter.
Yeah.
I'm like, what? If that's wine, what have I been drinking? Like this was just mind expanding. So yeah, that was like, I couldn't believe that was the same thing that I was doing. That was I'm making wine, or I'm making something that we call the same thing over here in Sonoma County. And I need to know more about that. Whatever that is in that decanter. Like, again, it was just, just energy popping out of the glass. Just so incredibly intriguing. And so that's kind of where the whole natural side of things started for me, where kind of putting it together, like, oh, I've been working for these biodynamic producers for years, but no one that I had worked for was really putting things in bottle like that. Still kind of making things a little bit more classically, a little bit more, less turbid, a little bit more crystalline, like crystal clear, aesthetically pleasing, whatever that means on the market shelves. This was the first time I had kind of been exposed to that style, that more wild, rugged, zero artifice wine. And we drank a few bottles that night. He opened a bottle of Christian Binner's. Oh, it must have been Hinterborg or something. But a Riesling from him, and I was like, boom, there it is. That's what I need to know that person.
Yeah.
So a few years later, when I quit Quivira, and I did like 4 more internships all like between hemispheres, and somehow weaseled my way into an internship with the Binner family.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like, I got the Jenny and Francois email off the back of that label.
Okay.
I emailed Jenny. She was like, here, absolutely. I'd love to give you his contact information. And so, that was a pretty formative moment there in the kitchen.
Yeah.
Yeah. And again, one of the kind of one of the OG wines for us from the first vintage, 2012. This is the one red that we made. So it's called Boaz. So we started with 100 cases of this. Actually, pretty interesting story on this one too. I had kind of reached out to, when I finally moved back from France, reached out to some friends back here. I knew Carignan was something I wanted to work with. Just knowing a few Carignans around, and tasting a bunch of stuff from the south of France, and then talking to producers there, saying this is a very it's a no-brainer for natural wine. High acidity, kind of rustic tannins. It can be lean. It can be rich and sort of meaty. But it's, in terms of fermentation, it typically is a very healthy one. And so I was like, well, that's where I want to start. If I'm going to start, I think I should start with something that is a little bit more reliable.
Sure.
So I kind of struck out trying to find some Carignan around here, and this was kind of before Carignan saw its heyday. I think it was really tough to find there for a little while, but I'd gotten in with the Testa family through Tegan Pasalakwa, just asking him. That guy knows better basically everything.
Sure.
In the realm of California vineyards, especially older vineyards that would have good Carignan in it. So I got a phone call on my cell phone, probably midsummer 2012. And the one on the other line was like, "This is Maria Testa Vineyards. I hear you're looking for something interesting." I was like, oh, crazy. Yes, I am. And I'm like, wait, like Testa? She's like, well, do you know have you had the wines before? I'm like, well, Tony Couturi's Testa Vineyard Carignan was the first American natural wine I ever had. And to me, across his range, it just always seemed to be the prettiest, consistent wine, across his range. His range can be, kind of all over the place, big Zinfandels, sometimes a little bit of residual sugar they feel like, or maybe a little bit of bread. But the Testa Carignan was always so sexy and so lovely. And so she was like, "Oh yeah, that's a funny thing." She's like, "That's actually the block that's available.
Wow.
If you'd like to come have a look, I'd love to show it to you." I'm like, "No way. I can't believe that this is happening right now." So super full circle. I was like, "You know what?
Cool.
I'll take it. I know this is the one. I'd love to come meet you." I was in Utah at the time. I'll be out there in a month. So walking around with her, and just the place is incredible. You can tell it's been farmed with intention for 112 years. You walk in to the vineyard after they've pruned, and you can just tell that someone has taught people how to do it for a while. It's just really well balanced, really lovely soil profile. The family are, they're a gaggle of incredible human beings. Some of the best farmers that I've come across. And the fruit, hauling that away, with the Testa legacy behind it, with 5 generations, there's, that certain amount of pressure that you feel. You've got the fruit on the trailer, and you're like, oh no. I remember being actually pretty scared the very first year we took it away, just because you don't want to, you want to fuck it up.
Yeah.
And so, so we're in our 12th, just did our 12th vintage with them. It's never seen any additions whatsoever. Nothing,
Wow.
never, ever. 12 different years.
That is healthy.
We've grown into 3 different blocks. It was just the Carignan at first, because she wouldn't let me buy anything else. But sort of earning the right to ask for other things along the way. We've seen the addition of the original planting of Grenache, which is from 1912, and an older planting of Cabernet, which they came into the ranch, I guess probably in the late 90s.
Okay.
All picked on the same day, all fermented together, a la feints, just kind of looking for a spectrum of ripeness, not just like uniform ripeness across the board. We based the decision on Carignan, and whenever that's ready, that's when we pick everything else.
Okay.
Whole cluster, Grenache and Cab go to the bottom of the tank. Carignan goes over the top, and then we basically tread that.
Okay.
So there's a good bit of this ferment that goes carbonic on the bottom.
Sure.
Without the the breaking up of berries and stuff. So it's, I would say, partial carbonic on this, but just trying to keep things light, bright, lithe.
Yeah.
For these can be pretty gruff, big red varieties. There's still a sort of, it still has this spine to it, this levity.
What's a blend? Because I feel like the Carignan really comes through.
Dominates for sure.
Yeah.
It's probably, this vintage is probably 75 Carignan, 10 Grenache, 5 Cab, something like that. You don't want to go overboard on Cab picked at 19 or 20, you know?
Yeah, get a little green.
See, but I do like that. I love,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
especially when it's green like that, it can also be really floral. Cabernet.
I don't mind
violets.
I don't mind a little greenness.
Yeah, no, me either.
A wine. I love Carignan though.
Mm-hmm.
I love like that kind of hibiscus cranberry sort of thing.
Yep, that hibiscus tea. There's almost that.
The Jamaica kind of.
Totally. Yeah, there's that you know, cranberry, huckleberry, forest floor play. Whoa. Did I say floor play? I've never said that before. I'm gonna have to use that. Forest floor play.
There's a new wine.
There's a new wine name. We're constantly looking for them. All right, I'm going.
Write it down.
I'm copywriting that today. Yeah, and then we, you know, it goes on. It goes dry on skins. We press it off. It goes to polyethylene and old barrel, bottled in the fall, and then released the next spring.
Okay.
Yeah, super simple. It's the thing that I love best, and the thing I'm constantly harping on with this particular one is like it's kind of a like a window into the Testa family, what they've been doing for the last 100 years. We try to make it, you know, with as little input as possible. Like what would they have been doing in 1975?
Yeah.
So it's a really simple wine to make. For all intents and purposes, it just takes care of itself. Never asks for too much more than you know what you did at harvest. You just put it away and then bottle it. One racking.
I know the vineyard, but I don't know all the particulars of it. But so they've been farming it continually for 100 some years.
Yep. So planted originally in 1912 by a couple of Italian immigrants. Yeah. They moved from just north of Milan, Emilia-Romagna. Kind of set up shop in the Bay Area. The husband Gaetano, at least from all the stories and what we've read, he was an attorney.
Okay.
But rather than setting up practice in San Francisco, I think they kind of figured out that maybe not the best place to raise a family. At turn of the century, San Francisco, port city, and so I think they packed up and moved north and settled in this little community just north of Ukiah.
Yeah.
Little town called Calpella, and they've been there ever since.
Okay.
Farmed primarily, headed primarily by the mothers, so it's been pretty matriarchal in the farming anyway. The husbands have always kind of seemed to have something else to do.
Okay.
So I think that's a fairly interesting tidbit, especially in the wine world and just the world in general. So they're on their 5th generation now. Maria's currently passing it to Charlie, the son. So kind of breaking the mold a little bit there.
Yeah. Okay.
The daughters are involved. There's a couple daughters involved, but they're more on the sales and marketing side. They have a tasting room. They make their own wine there, and so they kind of they're kind of at the helm with all of that. I don't know how old Charlie is. He's got to be 20.
Do you know if it was it one of the vineyards that Italian Swiss colony kind of like sent cuttings to? I know they sent cuttings to a lot of like families up there to sort of supply wines like around that time.
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm actually unaware if that's something I've never even thought to ask.
I was
if that's
scared.
Something that happened. Yeah.
But that's interesting that it's been kind of matriarchal, sort of leading the charge with it. So
yeah,
that's awesome. Yeah.
I mean, the current husband, Rusty, is an incredible human, but he's had a construction company for years. Mostly paving, and so that's kept him super busy. I mean, obviously he gets out on the tractor,
sure,
he helps out with harvest and all that stuff, but Maria's the one out there with the clipboard.
Yeah, I love the Carignan coming through on that.
It's fun too because it definitely shows that it's not over the top, but there is just that slight sort of roasted, almost like ribeye crust. Like that. It's like kind of meaty, kind of peppercorny, but like kind of fire kissed meat crust. Back to Fox Hill. This is 100% Sangiovese. It's almost entirely the Grosso clone,
Okay.
which would be the one that you would find, more in Brunello. So bigger berries, bigger clusters. I find it to be more perfumed and more delicate than the Piccolo. It's never going to be low on tannin, I don't think, Sangiovese. But not quite so extracted and gruff as what you might find from the Piccolo clone. There's a little bit of Piccolo in here, but not much.
Real classic kind of structure to it, though. I mean,
Yeah, it's really. So I worked in Brunello in 2010. The family in Alto Adige that I worked for also had a Brunello estate,
okay.
and so I kind of went back and forth between the two, which was a pretty incredible experience. I don't think that I was into Brunello or Sangiovese at all before I went.
Okay.
But they were like, "Hey, we need some help down south. Would you mind driving down there and just giving a hand?" They're like, "We're harvesting all of this tomorrow. We need all hands on deck." I'm like, "Yeah, for sure." But then falling in love with Sangiovese while I was there, I was like, "Oh, I've never had. I don't. This is a gigantic hole in my knowledge." You have a few of them and a few things from Chianti while you're studying, but you don't take it too deep of a dive if you're not really. I wasn't really that interested in big red wine, especially with a lot of the modern stuff coming out of Brunello. That didn't interest me at all. But working for them here, it's a winery called Corta Pavone. I don't know if they're not distributed too widely.
Okay.
But yeah, basically just ripped the page out of their playbook with this one. We employ full whole cluster maceration, so there's no destemming on this. And then we're aerated as hell all throughout fermentation. Just a couple punch downs just to break up the must, as it's rising to the surface. But we're not doing them daily. We're doing almost entirely pump overs.
Okay.
But really, really aerating things along the way, just to try to sort of synthesize tannins to really get them to try to bind to each other, so that color and tannin don't fall out, and the tannins form longer chains as quickly as possible. And then a portion of this actually stays on skins and stems throughout the winter. So we basically press this and that lot, and then Killian on the same day in the spring. So that particular lot, it ends up being like 600 liters. It's not a huge portion of the blend. It's roughly like a quarter of it or 20% of it. And that ends up giving it this really different tannin structure. This is actually the softer one between the two. We call it the leather daddy. But it ends up smelling like a Boulevardier, very like a leathery, like a smoky Boulevardier. So very like bitter Amari on the nose, really high toned and pretty, but also earthy, like baked earth and like a bookshelf. So I find that it broadens the spectrum of this particular wine quite a bit. And then it's in barrel for 2 years, so old oak puncheons, and then in bottle like 6 months. We just released this, so we actually bottle it and then release it almost immediately.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
What's the sulfur that you're usually having to do with
This one? We've never sulfured this one.
No? Okay.
It's a high acid grade. It ferments really healthy, really clean. It comes in kind of mid-September, and it's already warm outside. And I find mid-September is the easiest. Like those 2 weeks, those 2 weeks there are like the sweet spot. Early September is the heat wave. The later you get into the season, the cooler it gets. But those 2 weeks, the second and third week of September, are always like I can sleep at night. I love how Sangiovese can be both pretty and really powerful, like delicate on the nose, cherries and herbs, like scrubby herbs, like thyme and oregano and all those things you would expect out of Tuscany. But then on the palate, it's just like really tannic. But then in the middle, you can see the difference between Boaz and El Stone. There's more sort of flesh in the middle of this one, more extract, a little like more mid-palate, more softness. This is still lean almost and tannic at the same time.
Yeah, this one, For me, it just has more kind of angles
Oh,
to
for sure.
it. But yeah, I mean, 001, so clean and classic.
Yep.
Pretty tough to beat that.
And it's also not something that falls apart immediately. 2 days from now, this will be kind of browned out and kind of raisiny probably, and it might go on to that sort of THP, almost sort of mousy character. But that's 2 days from now. Like if you can't finish that in 2 days, that's not my problem. That's on you. And again, I think it's how you work with the grapes. It's the cleanliness of your facility. It's the health of the grapes. It's all of those things. And you can build sturdiness into wine by the way that you treat things. Your aeration, like working the cap, like actually working your fermentations consistently, and not cutting corners here, there, and everywhere. Top your barrels. That's not something I've historically been always that great with. But here comes Mike, our assistant winemaker, and he's on it all the time, and he's happy to do it. Where I'm like, ugh, I don't want to go do that right now.
Yeah.
I'd rather go skiing. But yeah, he's a legend. That's what he's doing right now.
You want to tell me a little bit about your new project?
Ooh, Dirty Gold.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny. We were talking about it a little bit earlier, but I think with the propensity of I think younger generation, myself included, and people that are really interested in obscurity or things that are rare or things that are things that are some things that people haven't heard of or unaware of, or the underdogs or whatever, and growing up in a world where all we talked about was Sauvignon Blanc, Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, Cabernet, Pinot Gris. I think I was very drawn to Fox Hill in particular, and some of these other historical vineyards that we now are lucky enough to work with, but especially Fox Hill, because it was none of that, none of those things. At that point, it was 20-something different varieties planted to 60 acres, and it was just kind of a playground. And I was like, oh, I want to know everything about all this stuff. And I don't really care about Sauvignon Blanc anymore. I don't really care about Chardonnay, especially not like I did. But I think, yeah, after a decade or so of being, eyeballs deep in obscurity, there was a point where, I don't remember even touching a cluster of Chardonnay or seeing Chardonnay or drinking Chardonnay. I was like, I want a Chardonnay right now. Like, I want one that is made in this fashion, with, not oaky, not buttery, not gross. Like, there are those out there for sure already, but I wanted to see what we could do in the way that we do it.
Yeah.
I made a little bit of Chardonnay in Australia, like, I don't know, 8 years ago or something like that. But let's see what that can do. Let's find a really sick vineyard. We've after doing it for so long, you're not cool. I mean, it's not like we're rolling, but you're also not bootstrapping every single thing anymore. Where, before I wouldn't have been able to afford $3,300 white fruit.
Yeah.
That just wasn't a possibility. But, if you make a tiny amount of it and you've also got all these other wines that are supporting you, then you have a little bit more leeway. And so I was like, you know what, fuck it, let's do it. So the idea came to me that there were also a whole bunch of other varieties that I've been ignoring for the last 10 years. All those varieties that I just mentioned. So we started this project with the idea of kind of a homecoming. This is a lot of what brought us to the wine world, a lot of what brought our generation of drinkers classic stuff, moving up through the court of masters, getting drilled into what makes Merceau different from, whoever down the street, name the AOC. So I just don't think that there's a lot of reference for that anymore with the next generation of drinkers. And so maybe showing that new generation that this is what you can do with those old varieties that you have just shat on for no reason for the last, for all of your wine drinking life. But also for some of the people that like us that are like our age that are that did start there, but are way more into this stuff now than some of the old guard, and seeing those varieties in our hands and treating them like we do, the results are astounding. It's really, really fun to see. And, we know more vineyard owners now. We know more spots. We've got our fingers in a lot of pots in Mendocino and Sonoma County now. And so coming up with fruit is easier.
Sure.
And finding great vineyards is easier than it used to be. And so, yeah, Sauvignon Blanc, Riesling, Chardonnay, those are going to be our first release.
Okay.
All very enigmatic vineyards, all done just like we do it here with Ruth. But again, a very different expression. It's so funny tasting through. One of my favorite things to do is to be alone at the winery and just tasting through barrels, tasting through tanks. This is the time of year that I'm most pleased with it, because everything is starting to show like, oh, I'm a wine and I'm good now. Whereas, a few months ago, it's like, oh, you're kind of all over the place and you're still turbid and you're still fizzy. And there's it's all wine now, which is fun to see. But going through and tasting barrel to barrel or tank to tank, and all this rustic Italian stuff, all this esoteric, non-French, non-normal varieties that I'm so used to now, going to a barrel of Sauvignon Blanc or going to a barrel of Cabernet, and I'm almost like, what is this? Oh my God. But then you're like, oh wait, this is Las Cimas. That's our Bordeaux blend. Duh. Of course it's going to be, black currant and, menthol and capsicum. Like that's what that should be. That's so cool. And so we're super excited to get that out. We're building the website now. We're starting the newsletter now. We're getting people signed up on it now. Tiny production, anywhere from, the first vintage was 21. That's another thing. We're holding on to these for actually quite a bit longer than we normally otherwise would. We have the opportunity to do it. We have the space. We've got the wherewithal and the time. And for some of these, it's I feel like it's required. I don't think Chardonnay really shows its guts until a couple years in. And so we're just starting to bottle these now, and get the first few releases out in the next month or so. So website will be up hopefully in a couple weeks. dirtygoldwines.com, Dirty Gold Wines on Instagram. And that's all we do. We have a newsletter and we have Instagram.
Yeah.
Not doing TikTok.
Yeah.
I'm too old for TikTok.
Awesome. Those are fun to look forward to.
Yeah.
Seeing them through.
Yeah, I'm really proud of
new
it,
light.
for sure.
So,
absolutely.
Tell me a little bit about the name, the Ruth.
Ruth. It's. I've said it. I try to say it a different way every time. And it is. I can realize it can be a little bit convoluted or confusing or whatever. But back when starting the winery, you have to come up with something. And the knee jerk is to, just call it yourself, Evan Lewandowski Wines. And I don't know, I think, looking around the greater world or wine world at large, I think there's a lot of ego out there. There's a lot of, look at me, rock star winemaker, sign the back of the bottle. I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm not saying that's bad or anything, but it's just not me. I know how much goes into it. I know it's never just me. It couldn't possibly be just me, and if it was, it wouldn't be that great. And so I think the push to call it something else was real strong. But having worked in Europe and abroad, I think the family name is important. And I like that idea of legacy that you see kind of passed down from year to year to year. Like you look at a bottle from Alsace and it's so-and-so and then their family name.
Yeah.
Or domain so-and-so. Like it's the wife first, then the husband, and then the family name. But they've retired probably for 20 years and it's their kids that are doing it. But the parents are still listed on the label. The kids will eventually, leave it to whoever, and then their name will be on the label. It's just, I like the idea of legacy. I think that's really fun. Not that I have anybody to pass it to, but, stranger things have happened. Who knows what's in store for the next few years. But yeah, so I wanted to have the family name on there because I think that's neat. But had to come up with something else. I grew up pretty sort of like crappy Catholic. Um, first, last one's in the door, first one's out. Didn't really know what was going on. Didn't really care. Went to Sunday school every Sunday. And then had a pretty strong stint in the evangelical church. So non-denominational Christian. And that can have certain effects on you for sure. Some good, some not so good. But I think there's always an opportunity to find beauty in spiritual texts, no matter if you outgrow them or you graduate in your way of thought. And I definitely have done that. I definitely don't believe what I used to believe. I have a very, very different view on things now. But I do still hold this particular book, Ruth, in the Old Testament, really near and dear to my heart. It's a book of redemption. It's a book of change. It's a book of tragedy. Basically, tragedy takes hold of this family at the very beginning of this book, and by the end of the book, I like to think the universe has righted the ship, and beauty has come from the tragedy, and this particular beauty could not have come at all if the tragedy didn't happen. So I think it's more of a worldview. It's more of a way of thinking. It's more of a perspective thing for me. It's farming, dirt, and a bunch of carbon-based molecules that are breaking down, often from living things that have died, now providing life to a soil. It's fermentation in a lot of ways. It's the build up and die off of multiple strains of bacteria and yeast doing their jobs, leaving their signatures. It's a lot. I think to me, it's death, and then the redemption of death is the I think it's the theme of the universe. It just keeps things moving, and it's we say it all the time, like it's the engine of life. Things can't be alive without things having died first, and so that's what that book means to me. It's how I view a lot of how I was raised and how I don't adhere to a lot of the ways that I was raised anymore, and that might have been a tragedy, the way that I had to repress myself. But after time and a little bit of patience and a little bit of understanding and self forgiveness, you can actually live despite that, and potentially maybe even live more fully and be more compassionate with others because of the way that things went at the beginning. So that's maybe too deep, or maybe a little bit too personal, but that's why that's the name. That's where the name Ruth comes from. Yeah. And then each, a lot of the Brown label names are from that book. So Naomi, Elimelech, that was her husband. Killian, Malin is the Arnase. They were brothers. Boaz would be considered the hero in the book, whereas Ruth is kind of the heroine. And then Elstone, he's a hero in his own right. He's the gentleman that planted Fox Hill Vineyard. So this is kind of an homage to him. Yeah. So he kind of broke the mold in the Brown label naming. Elstone's not in the book of Ruth. But yeah, so that's where the name comes from. Very good. And most people assume it's my grandma or my mom or my girlfriend. Not any of those things, no. And often it's funny how often now we get emails, well, we're doing this, all female winemaker tasting or whatever. We're hoping that you could be there, and I have to explain the whole situation. Like, I'm not. Well, they're like, oh, okay, well, you can't come. Yeah. How dare you?
And you were mentioning kind of everything coming from the dirt in there, but you help with a lot of the farming of the vineyards you work with also, right? And you have been for a while.
I would say it's probably less than it ever has been. Okay. Especially with Chris coming on and purchasing Fox Hill. Chris is very hands-on and enjoys the management of his own property, and so that's kind of fallen off. Luckily, we've we did have the opportunity to be involved for a long time there. 2014 to 2021, 2022. And so seeing a lot of those things happen because we were there is kind of fun. And it's only getting better now. Now that Chris has it, he's gone ahead and he's tried to he's elevating the game there with keeping compost on site, and it's the whole thing is certified organic now. Whereas previously Lowell would not have ever paid to get it certified. There's no way.
Yeah, Chris had said he was making biochar.
Yep. No, things
kind of.
He's bringing animals in as much as
Yeah.
he can now, and sheep are moving through. Probably not too long from now. And yeah, it's only onward and upward with that. And so I can get a little sentimental about not having too much to do with it anymore. But at the end that's the best thing that could have happened for the vineyard. And then we're lucky enough to partner with the Testa family. Like, I don't know that I have too much to say to them about farming, to be honest. There's nothing that I've seen that I've been like, could you do it this way? But in terms of of grafting, worked on a couple different spots up at Lost Hills, and then just looking at different ways to do things. For sure, we do still have the opportunity to speak my mind in those regards. But the honest truth is that I'm not quite out there as much as I used to, or as much as I would like to be. But I'm just not really in that position anymore. So I think that's another one of the reasons the Utah project is on my mind more frequently than it ever has been, is simply because that I'm not boots on the ground like I was anymore.
Sure.
So, and things shift and things change, and there are eras for sure. And I know that I'm just in that I'm much more of in the negociant era than I ever have been. But thank God it's like I've worked with Fox Hill since first vintage was 09, as a little side project. These guys, especially being great friends at Cole Ranch, I have conversations with Mike about farming all the time. Obviously, he's the one that's got the reins and makes all the decisions or whatever, but we chat about it all the time. That's been farmed since the early 1900s, and is just, out there doing its own thing, gets pruned every year, gets tilled every year, and that's it. We're lucky to work with some incredible farmers and work with some places that are already doing the thing. But with Fox Hill is the one that's kind of shifted the most for us. But if someone else had bought Fox Hill, they'd be doing things very differently than Chris, I think. That's the danger there. The same danger that we had with Cole Ranch. A larger conglomerate or a larger company coming in and just seeing all the very interesting, unique stuff, not being able to even comprehend how that would be profitable, and then just putting on the profitable grapes on the property. So yeah, couldn't be more stoked with the outcome there.
Yeah, lucky to have like-minded folks kind of
Totally
running them.
Yeah.
So,
and there's a it's funny because I don't want to say I get down on myself, but I think you often have imposter syndrome if you're just if you're just like a negoce, if you're just negociant, if you're just buying fruit. But I know deep down that I'm doing way more than just buying fruit. I've been in this and either looking, helping, advising, being a part of for years. It's just changed enough that it's like, well, I think I still need to farm at some point. And I think that might be an impetus to actually get up and get it done. So yeah, it's a good question, and I just have to answer it differently now. It's an incredible thing to get to do every day. It's an awful lot of work, but I don't know that I could ever see myself doing anything else. And so I think that's where this idea of classic or legacy comes in. You start to get older and you start to look at things and like we were talking about earlier with the innumerable, this is air quotes, children that are making wine now, and you're not the cool young fresh face on the block anymore. And so then you do start to think oh, how are you a classic producer? How are you kind of a household name in the natural wine world? Um, and Yeah, I think those are the things that are going through my head even more nowadays than ever before. So yeah, I guess I don't know why I got off on that tangent again.
Yeah.
I think it's just because it's in my mind a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. What's the best way for people to keep track of what you guys are doing? And I know you have a Take It Easy club and
Yep. Yeah. So the wine club, which we like to refer to it as not a wine club, is called Take It Easy. We have 2 releases a year in the spring and the fall. We're just about to release the spring wines. I think there's still time to sign up. Really, I think you really only have a couple days, so that might not work for this podcast. But definitely get on for the fall. We always make unique one-offs for the wine club that don't go out to the larger distribution community. So that's a reason to get on there. Whether it's events or tickets to events or invites to certain special things at the winery or whatever. Also a boon for a wine club member, like half off merch, all that kind of stuff.
Okay.
But that's you can find that at RuthLewandowskiWines.com. As well as information on all the vineyards and all the wines, and there's a shopping cart there, so you can pick up wines that you might not be able to still find at your local bottle shop, because things do sell out, we understand, in shops, but we like to keep things around on the site. And then Instagram is Ruth Lewandowski. So potentially a little bit more irreverent take on advertising and marketing, but that's us anyway as a whole. So yeah, we've got a brand new wine for the wine club this spring called Anos. It's a blend of Montepulciano, Trebbiano, and Friulano, all the Anos off the Fox Hill property. And so that'll be the wine club wine for this particular go around. But we got a whole bunch of other things waiting in the wings too, which is pretty exciting.
Thanks for listening to my conversation with Evan. He's making such expressive wines for all occasions. Like we discussed, there's casual to serious wine, and many are 0-0. The fruit and farming he works with are top-notch as well. I tasted some of the Dirty Gold wines after the podcast was recorded, and those are great takes on more well-known varieties, but with Evan's light winemaking touch. I think you'll enjoy them too. You can follow what they're doing on Instagram at Ruth Lewandowski, and you can find the wines also at RuthLewandowskiWines.com. You should grab some. You can follow the podcast on wherever you're listening, and the Instagram at Indie Wine Podcast. And feel free to email indiewinepodcast@gmail.com with comments, questions, or feedback. If you could tell your wine friends about the podcast too, even just one of them, and help spread the word, I'd really appreciate it. Rating or subscribing helps too. There's also a Patreon if you choose to support the podcast monetarily to allow for more episodes and to help defray other costs. Any amount is appreciated. The link is in the show notes. We now have a small token of our appreciation to send to you also. We'll be back soon with another episode. Have a good one.